Greetings. This is Brother Eli with another episode of Bible Truth Revealed. Today's teaching is entitled The Head Covering Deception. That is, the head covering deception of all the nonsense written in the Christian Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 has probably caused the most confusion. After reading it, many Israelite men and women are left puzzled about whether they should cover or uncover their heads when praying or prophesying. Therefore, in this teaching, I will highlight a few of the arguments in that chapter and prove that they are nothing but lies that must be rejected by righteous Israelites. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 4 in the King James Version of the Christian Bible says this: Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. So many Israelites believe that if a man were to pray or prophesy with his head covered, he is dishonoring his head. Now let's check that in the Holy Scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament, so I can demonstrate that that is a lie. Exodus chapter 28 verses 2 to 4. Exodus chapter 28 verses 2 to 4, and I will be reading from the Brenton Septuagint translation. It says, And thou shalt make holy apparel for Aaron thy brother, for honor and glory. So 1 Corinthians 11 says, if a man prays or prophesies with his head covered, he is dishonoring his head. But now we're learning that there is holy apparel that Aaron the high priest should wear for honor. If this apparel includes head covering, then we are demonstrating that it's the opposite of what we've just read in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 4. Verse 3 says, And speak thou to all those who are wise in understanding, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom and perception, and they shall make the holy apparel of Aaron for the sanctuary, in which apparel he shall minister to me as priest. Now, part of Aaron's ministry is to pray for and prophesy to the children of Israel. And he must wear this holy apparel while doing that. Those people who are wise in understanding, who are filled with the spirit of wisdom and perception, were commanded to make the holy apparel for Aaron. Verse 4. And these are the garments which they shall make: the breastplate, and the shoulder piece, and the full-length robe, and the tunic with a fringe, and the tire. Now the tire is a head covering. So the head covering was part of the holy apparel for honor and glory. Aaron was required to wear this head covering while ministering before the Most High God, and that included praying or prophesying. It continues, and the girdle, and they shall make holy garments for Aaron and his sons to minister to me as priests. So not only Aaron the high priest, but his sons would wear the holy garments while ministering before the Most High God, and that includes praying and prophesying. So it's already showing that it is not true that every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. Exodus chapter 29, verses 4 to 9. Exodus 29, verses 4 to 9 reads thus: And thou shalt bring Aaron and his sons to the doors of the tabernacle of testimony, and thou shalt wash them with water. And having taken the garments, thou shalt put on Aaron thy brother both the full-length robe and the ephod and the oracle, and thou shalt join for him the oracle to the ephod. Verse 6. And thou shalt put the mitre, that's the head covering, on his head, and thou shalt put the plate, even the holiness, on the mitre. And thou shalt take of the anointing oil, and thou shalt pour it on his head, and thou shalt anoint him. And thou shalt bring his sons, and put garments on them. And thou shalt gird them with girdles, and put the tires, that's a head covering, upon them. And they shall have a priestly office to me forever. And thou shalt fill the hands of Aaron and the hands of his sons. So we've just learned that the mitre and the tires are all head coverings. Aaron wore the mitre and his sons wore the tires. The Most High commanded Moses to put head coverings on both Aaron and his sons. They were required to have their heads covered while performing their priestly duties. These duties include praying for and prophesying to the children of Israel. Therefore, we can conclude that 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4 is a bold-faced lie. Some Christians and Christianites convince themselves that when 1 Corinthians 11 verse 4 says, every man, it does not actually mean every man. They say that it means every man who is not a priest. Therefore, they claim that it only appears to be a contradiction. But let's keep reading 1 Corinthians chapter 11 so I can disprove that fallacy. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I will now read verses 5 and 6. That's 1 Corinthians 11, verse 5 and verse 6. But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered dishonoreth her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven. Now, no one ever insists that every woman does not really mean every woman. Therefore, we can also accept that the previous verse refers to every single man without exception. If every man does not mean every man, then every woman does not mean every woman. We have to be consistent. If every woman is being told that she has to cover her head while praying or prophesying, it also means that every man without exception must uncover his head while praying or prophesying. Therefore, there's no good explanation for this blatant contradiction in the Christian Bible. To be clear, the New Testament, so-called, says that every man must uncover his head while praying or prophesying, but the Old Testament, so-called, which is really the Holy Scriptures, says that Aaron and his sons, which are men, must wear the holy apparel, the holy garment, while performing their priestly duties. The holy garment includes head covering, which means that Aaron and his sons were required to wear the head covering while praying and prophesying. This was for honor and glory. There's nothing in that which shows that they were dishonoring their head. Verse 6 of 1 Corinthians chapter 11 says, "For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered." This man-made rule is used to force Christian and Christian-like women to cover their heads while praying or prophesying. It even says that if a woman does not cover her head while praying or prophesying, her hair must also be shaved off. Nevertheless, there is no requirement in the Torah or law of the Most High God for women to cover their heads while praying or prophesying. This is just another man-made rule that women are forced to follow in many Christian and Christian-like cults. The fact is, the wearing of head coverings has always been a part of Israelite culture, although no one is obligated to do so apart from the priests. Let's examine a few examples of head covering in the Holy Scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament. 2 Kings chapter 15 in the Brenton Septuagint translation is 2 Samuel chapter 15 in the KJV. I'll be reading 2 Kings chapter 15 verse 30. It says, "And David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, ascending and weeping, and had his head covered, and went barefooted. And all the people that were with him covered every man his head. And they went up, ascending and weeping." This shows that many people in Israel wore head coverings, not only the priests. However, only the priests were obligated by law to do so. Wearing head coverings is a part of Israelite culture. It's one of our customs, but we are not obligated by law to do so. Numbers chapter 5 verse 18. Numbers chapter 5 verse 18 says, "And the priest shall cause the woman to stand before the Lord." This is talking about a woman whose husband suspected that she might have been unfaithful to him. So this is the law of jealousy. The priest shall means the priest is required to. The priest must cause the woman to stand before the Lord. The word shall tells us the priest has no choice in the matter. It continues, "And shall uncover the head of the woman." So the priest has no choice but to uncover the head of this married woman. This means it can be taken for granted that this woman's head would have been covered. The priest cannot uncover her head if her head was not covered. If it was not Israelite custom for married women to wear head coverings, this would have said, if the woman's head is covered, the priest shall uncover her head. But there's no if. This is a requirement, which means it is expected that this married woman would have had her head covered, and now the priest shall remove that head covering from the woman. It continues, "And shall put into her hands the sacrifice of memorial." So that's another requirement on the part of the priest. The sacrifice of jealousy. "And in the hand of the priest shall be the water of this conviction that brings the curse." It should be clear from this verse that married women were expected permitted to wear head coverings. This is an Israelite custom, but not a legal requirement. Therefore, if a married Israelite woman chooses not to wear a head covering, she is not breaking the law of the Most High. She is simply not following the Israelite custom. To be perfectly clear, there is no law that says that a married woman must wear a head covering. Judith chapter 10 verses 1 to 3. This is Judith in the Apocrypha, chapter 10 verses 1 to 3. It reads thus. Now after that she had ceased to cry unto the God of Israel, and had made an end of all these words, she rose where she had fallen down, and called her maid, and went down into the house, in the which she abode in the Sabbath days, and in her feast days, and pulled off the sackcloth which she had on, and put off the garments of her widowhood. The word widowhood tells us that Judith was a widow. She was not a married woman because her husband had died. It continues, and washed her body all over with water, and anointed herself with precious ointment, and braided the hair of her head, and put on attire upon it. The same type of head covering that the sons of Aaron wore is the type of head covering that Judith put on her head. It's called attire. It continues, and put on her garments of gladness, wherewith she was clad during the life of Manasseh, her husband. So Judith was not a married woman. She was a widow because her husband had died. Yet she chose to wear attire or head covering. This shows that it was not only married women that wore head coverings. Any Israelite could wear head coverings. It was a normal part of Israelite custom. However, there is no law that requires us to do so. It is only the priests who are required to wear head coverings while performing their duties. And these duties include praying and prophesying. Therefore, we can conclude that 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 5 to 6 is also a bold-faced lie. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I will now read verse 14. Verse 14 says, Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? This nonsensical statement has confused both Christians and non-Christians for ages, because nature does not teach anyone that it is a shame for a man to have long hair. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 44 verses 18 and 20 so I can demonstrate that it is not a shame for a man to have long hair. That's Ezekiel chapter 44 verses 18 and 20. It says, And they shall have linen mitres upon their heads. So we are talking again about the priests. They are required to cover their heads, and shall have linen drawers upon their loins. And they shall not tightly gird themselves. Verse 20. And they shall not shave their heads, nor shall they pluck off their hair. This means that the priests were required to have long hair. So the so-called New Testament said that it is a shame for a man to pray or prophesy with his head covered. The Holy Scriptures said that the Most High required Aaron and his sons, the priests, to have their head covered while performing their priestly duties. It was an honor for them to do so. Now we're learning that the so-called New Testament says that it's a shame for a man to have long hair, but the Most High said that these men, the priests, must not shave their heads nor pluck off their hair. We are seeing complete opposites, contradictions in the Christian Bible. It continues, they shall carefully cover their heads. That's crystal clear. The Most High requires his priests to wear head coverings. He also requires them to have long hair. They are not allowed to shave their heads or pluck off their hair. Therefore, we can safely conclude that 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 14 is yet another bold-faced lie. The Most High is not against men covering our heads when praying or prophesying. He also does not insist that women cover their heads when praying or prophesying. If these things were important to him, he would have included them in the Torah, just like he included the requirement for the priests to wear their holy garments, which includes head coverings, while performing their priestly duties. The question might then be asked, if the Most High does not require men to uncover our heads when praying or prophesying, where did the practice come from? In the pulpit commentary, the commentary in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 4 includes this quote. The Greek custom was to pray with the head uncovered. Again, the Greek custom was to pray with the head uncovered. Vincent's Word Studies says this. The Greeks remained bareheaded during prayer or sacrifice. Again, the Greeks remained bareheaded during prayer or sacrifice. Christian Bible commentators openly admit that the custom to remove our head coverings when praying or prophesying comes from the Greeks, not from the Most High. As I repeatedly demonstrate, the so-called New Testament promotes Greek philosophy while giving lip service to the Hebrew scriptures. This is why Christians and Christianites continue to practice Greek customs despite the Most High's warning not to follow the ways of the heathen. For a thorough understanding of this deception, please listen to my teaching entitled, The Epistle to the Hebrews is Greek Philosophy. That is, the Epistle to the Hebrews is Greek philosophy. In conclusion, it does not matter whether we cover or uncover our heads while praying or prophesying, because there is no requirement in the Torah for us to do one or the other. It's only the priests who were required to cover their heads while ministering before the Most High. There is no reason to be confused by the lies of the so-called New Testament when it comes to this or any other issue. The righteous remnant of Israel adheres to the Torah or law of the Most High and confidently rejects man-made rules that were purposefully created to cause confusion. And with that I say, Shalom.